These weren't actors pretending to be hard. These men bled authenticity on every frame. From prison riots to motorcycle crashes, from studio system rebellion to battlefield scars, we're counting down 10 actors who brought real danger to the silver screen. But here's what nobody talks about. One of them turned down a James Bond audition because his real life was already more dangerous than anything producers could write. Let's go. Number 10. Robert Mitchum. The lazy-eyed rebel who made indifference look dangerous. Mitchum didn't arrive in Hollywood as a polished product. He arrived as a criminal with nothing left to lose. A marijuana arrest in 1948 that he shrugged off like a parking ticket changed everything about his image in America. When studio executives asked him about the scandal that would have destroyed most actors, Mitchum responded with such casual honesty that audiences loved him more for the arrest than they did for his roles. He wasn't apologizing. He was telling you the truth. And somehow that made him the most dangerous man on screen. Before Hollywood discovered him, Mitchum had already worked chain gangs, lived homeless, and done actual time in actual jails. He brought that weight to every role. In The Night of the Hunter, his portrayal of a predatory preacher felt so authentic that parents complained the film was too intense for theaters. Directors obsessed over the way he moved through scenes. That slow-burn menace suggesting violence was always simmering beneath the surface, waiting to explode. Lee Server, his biographer, claimed Mitchum never truly acted tough because he had absolutely nothing to prove. The toughness was simply who he was. His co-star Gregory Peck admitted he felt genuinely threatened during their scenes together in Cape Fear. Not because of dialogue or blocking, but because Mitchum's eyes revealed something darker than any script could capture. He made audiences believe he'd actually hurt people, that violence came naturally to him. Studio heads wanted to control him. They failed. Mitchum did exactly what he wanted, when he wanted, and his refusal to play the Hollywood game only made audiences more obsessed. By the 1960s, he was one of the highest-paid actors in cinema, not despite his criminal past, but because of it. Authenticity sells in ways that manufactured image never can. Number 9. Burt Lancaster. 6 feet of pure athletic fury, wrapped in $1 million smile and genuine danger. Lancaster wasn't just pretending to be an acrobat in his films. He was an actual circus acrobat before Hollywood discovered him. While other actors trained for weeks to master a single stunt, Lancaster had spent years perfecting complex physical movements that required precision and fearlessness. He did his own flips, his own fight choreography, and his own death scenes, long before stunt coordinators became standard on major productions. What made Lancaster genuinely intimidating wasn't just his physical prowess. It was his refusal to accept the studio system's rules. In the 1950s, when executives controlled every aspect of an actor's career, Lancaster formed his own production company called Hecht Hill Lancaster. He fought back against censorship, refused roles that insulted his intelligence, and walked away from million-dollar contracts when the scripts didn't interest him. Producers learned quickly that Lancaster wasn't there to obey commands. He was there to create art, and he would burn every bridge to prove that principle. In The Killers, his debut film, critics noted something visceral about his presence. The camera couldn't contain him. He seemed genuinely dangerous because he possessed actual competence that couldn't be faked. When Lancaster threw a punch on camera, audiences believed it because he'd trained to throw real punches with real force. When he performed acrobatic sequences, audiences gasped because no safety nets existed in those early scenes. He'd literally risked his body for the film. Director John Huston called him the most self-possessed actor he'd ever worked with, someone who understood exactly how much power he possessed. Number 8. James Coburn. The master of understated menace who proved danger didn't need volume. Coburn's smile was a weapon, and audiences knew it from frame one. His voice rumbled like distant thunder, gravelly and knowing. But what set Coburn apart wasn't his voice or his looks. It was his actual combat training at the highest levels of martial arts. He didn't learn martial arts for a movie role. He studied under Bruce Lee, when Bruce Lee was teaching only a select handful of students who demonstrated genuine commitment to the discipline. Bruce Lee publicly stated that Coburn was one of his elite students, someone who understood that martial arts were a complete philosophy, not just a physical practice. This wasn't casual celebrity training. This was a serious commitment to understanding martial arts as a way of being. In The Dead Heat on a Merry-Go-Round, Coburn's movements carried an authenticity that distinguished him from actors who merely looked dangerous. He actually was dangerous. He possessed the training, the discipline, and the understanding of hand-to-hand combat that Bruce Lee himself respected. What audiences responded to was the combination. Coburn had the looks of a leading man, the charm of a Hollywood star, and the genuine combat ability of someone who'd dedicated years to training. In Our Man Flint and other spy films, his performance felt effortless because Coburn knew he could actually handle any physical confrontation the script demanded. Directors loved him because he required minimal action direction. Later in his career, when arthritis limited his physical capabilities, Coburn reinvented himself through his voice and his eyes, proving that his toughness had never relied solely on physical prowess. The danger had always been in his intelligence. Number 7. Steve McQueen, the rebel who never learned to stop rebelling. McQueen grew up in reform schools, became a car thief as a teenager, and found purpose in the United States Marine Corps. That military discipline saved his life, but it never tamed his spirit. When he arrived in Hollywood, McQueen brought that same volatile energy to everything he did. He didn't act like a difficult star. He was genuinely difficult because he refused to compromise on anything that mattered to him. In Bullet, McQueen didn't settle for stunt doubles during the most famous car chase in cinema history. He drove much of the sequence himself, pushing his Dodge Charger and the pursuing Jaguar to genuinely dangerous speeds through San Francisco streets that weren't closed or controlled. The tension audiences felt wasn't artificial. Cameras captured a real actor, pushing real vehicles to real limits with real danger. McQueen broke his wrist during the filming, continued shooting without complaint, and never mentioned it publicly. That wasn't just professionalism. That was obsession. His personal life mirrored his on-screen intensity perfectly. McQueen raced motorcycles competitively at professional levels, owned vehicles most collectors couldn't afford to insure, and lived with the constant adrenaline that defined his films. When a stalker broke into his home, McQueen didn't call police immediately. He confronted the intruder directly, pulled a gun, and handled the situation himself without hesitation. Directors described him as unpredictable. Castmates used words like dangerous. But audiences loved him because his on-screen rebellion felt entirely authentic. McQueen wasn't faking anything. By the time he made The Great Escape and The Thomas Crown Affair, McQueen had become the ultimate movie star. But he'd never become safe. Number 6. Chuck Norris. Before the internet turned him into a meme, Chuck Norris was legitimately the face of American martial arts. 6-time professional middleweight karate champion. That's not Hollywood exaggeration. That's fact. Norris didn't learn to fight for a movie role. He dedicated decades to mastering combat while building a reputation as one of the most talented martial artists alive. When he transitioned into film, audiences understood they were watching someone with authentic credentials. Chuck Norris brought the discipline that martial arts demanded. He opened fight schools across America, trained police units in combat techniques, and consulted with military organizations. His credibility existed completely outside Hollywood, built through genuine achievement in competitive martial arts at the highest levels. When audiences watched him in Missing in Action or Delta Force, they weren't seeing an actor pretending to be skilled. They were seeing an actual world-class martial artist. The Bruce Lee comparison is inevitable, but Chuck Norris deserves credit for bringing martial arts legitimacy into mainstream American action cinema. He went toe-to-toe with Bruce Lee on film, in Return of the Dragon, and survived. Which sounds like Hollywood fiction until you realize it was choreographed by Bruce Lee himself. What audiences responded to wasn't flash or theatricality. It was competence and genuine skill. In the Missing in Action series, Norris performed with the calm of someone who'd actually defeated opponents, who actually understood combat, who actually possessed muscle memory that months of movie training could never replicate. Number 5. Clint Eastwood, the silent killer who changed action cinema forever. Eastwood didn't arrive in Hollywood as a major star. He was a television actor, a bit player for Universal Studios that major executives considered interchangeable. Then, Sergio Leone saw something in him that major directors had missed, and Eastwood became the embodiment of a new kind of toughness. He wasn't loud. He wasn't bombastic. He was economical, controlled, and lethal. One stare meant more than another actor's 5-minute monologue. What distinguished Eastwood wasn't supernatural ability or martial arts training. It was complete command of his instrument. Every movement was calculated. Every gesture carried weight. Directors described his work ethic as obsessive. He studied scenes, understood motivations, and performed with the precision of someone who'd analyzed his craft thoroughly. On set, Eastwood moved with purpose, never wasting motion, never overacting. That discipline created an aura of danger because audiences sensed absolute control. His personal life maintained that same no-nonsense approach. Eastwood didn't participate in the gossip, the schmoozing, or the political games that defined Hollywood social life. He showed up, did the work, and left. Directors loved him because he made their jobs easier. Producers loved him because he came in on schedule and under budget. When Eastwood moved behind the camera, he brought that same discipline to directing. In Dirty Harry, Unforgiven, and Gran Torino, audiences watched someone who understood violence and understood that true toughness often involves restraint rather than explosion. Eastwood created an archetype of masculinity that influenced generations. Number 4. Ernest Borgnine, the unsinkable force who proved toughness had nothing to do with conventional attractiveness. Borgnine wasn't a handsome leading man. He had a weathered face, a stocky build, and a voice that sounded like gravel and steel. Yet he became one of the most respected and consistently working actors in Hollywood history. His power came from authenticity and genuine experience. Before the movies, Borgnine spent a decade in the United States Navy, serving during World War II in combat situations. Borgnine brought that military discipline to every film set. Co-stars and crew members reported that he never acted like a star. He arrived early, stayed late, supported younger actors, and approached the work with the seriousness of someone who'd seen actual combat. In From Here to Eternity, audiences felt his authentic military bearing. He understood how soldiers moved, how they spoke, how they carried themselves. That wasn't acting. That was lived experience channeled through performance. His roles in Marty, The Poseidon Adventure, and The Dirty Dozen showcased a range that proved his toughness extended far beyond physical capability. Borgnine could convey danger through subtlety and presence, suggesting this man had experienced things softened people would never understand. Yet, he was also capable of surprising tenderness, showing that genuine strength encompasses compassion. He worked constantly, appearing in over 200 films across 7 decades. What audiences responded to was his refusal to compromise. He treated every scene with professionalism and respect. Number 3. Charles Bronson, the silent, lethal force who conveyed more through a stare than most actors managed through dialogue. Bronson grew up in poverty, worked in coal mines as a child, and carried the physical evidence of that harsh life throughout his career. His face told stories that scripts could never articulate. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but his appearance conveyed authenticity and lived hardship. Bronson had actually lived hard. He served in World War II, earned a Purple Heart, and returned with scars both visible and invisible. When Bronson transitioned into acting, he brought that weight to every role. In The Magnificent Seven, he existed on screen like someone who actually knew how to handle violence. Death Wish became his defining role, a film that captured the zeitgeist of 1970s America while showcasing Bronson's ability to convey rage through physical presence rather than outbursts. He didn't shout about his character's motivations. He simply embodied them. In Hell in the Pacific and countless other films, Bronson proved that dialogue was often unnecessary. His face, his movements, his very presence told audiences everything they needed to know. What made Bronson genuinely formidable was his consistency. He worked steadily, often in low-budget action films that major stars considered beneath them. Yet he treated every project with complete commitment. By the time he made his final films in his 80s, Bronson remained formidable because his toughness was never dependent on youth. It was dependent on lived experience. Number 2. Kirk Douglas, the volcanic powerhouse who fought the studio system and won. Douglas rose from absolute poverty, built himself through sheer determination, and arrived in Hollywood with something to prove. He wasn't a gifted athlete or martial artist. He was a brilliant actor with volcanic intensity, and the business acumen to recognize that power in Hollywood meant controlling your own career completely. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, when studios controlled actors like property, Douglas fought back repeatedly, risking his career for principles that most actors would have compromised. He produced Spartacus specifically to employ blacklisted writer Dalton Trumbo, knowing the decision would damage his relationships with powerful producers. He insisted on screen credit for Trumbo, breaking the blacklist and exposing the cowardice of the McCarthy era. That wasn't a calculated career move. That was a man willing to sacrifice his own interests for principle. In Paths of Glory, Lust for Life, and Ace in the Hole, Douglas gravitated toward morally complex roles that questioned authority and challenged conventional morality. He wanted scripts that meant something, that explored human darkness. Directors described him as demanding, difficult, and absolutely uncompromising on quality. His personal life reflected that same intensity. He didn't hide who he was. When he survived a helicopter crash, he didn't hide the trauma. Douglas insisted on being seen, on being authentic. Number 1. Lee Marvin, the apex predator who brought actual warfare to cinema. Before Hollywood discovered him, Marvin was a Marine in the Pacific during World War II. He was wounded at Saipan and sent home with a Purple Heart, carrying physical evidence of combat trauma that shaped every role he would ever play. When Marvin appeared on screen, audiences sensed something fundamentally different about him. He wasn't pretending to be dangerous. He had actually been dangerous in ways that peaceful actors could never fake. Marvin brought that war experience to every role. In The Dirty Dozen, he commanded scenes with an authority that came from actual military experience and actual combat knowledge. He understood how soldiers moved, how officers gave orders, how men responded to leadership in life or death situations. In Point Blank, he embodied cold-blooded vengeance with intensity that suggested genuine understanding of violence's real consequences. What audiences responded to in Lee Marvin was unmistakable authenticity. He lived hard, drank hard, and refused to apologize for either choice. In his personal life, he was known for fiercely defending friends, standing up to studio executives, and conducting himself with the kind of no-nonsense attitude that came from surviving actual combat. When other actors were carefully managing their images with publicists, Marvin was being himself, unfiltered and unapologetic. His later roles proved that age and experience only deepened his presence. Directors sought him out because they knew what they were getting. Someone who actually understood violence, who actually understood the weight of consequence. He didn't need to act tough. He simply had to exist on screen. These 10 actors prove that genuine toughness comes from lived experience, not from performance techniques or acting classes. The question for you: who deserves to be in this conversation? Who did we rob by leaving them off this list? Is there an actor from recent decades who matches the toughness of these legends? Or did something fundamental change in Hollywood that made this particular brand of authenticity impossible to find anymore? The comments section is waiting for your hot takes, your arguments, and your fierce debates about who should have made the cut and who didn't belong here. Tell us who we got right and who we got completely wrong.